I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Today we speak about consciously giving birth and parenting in the face of a predicament-laden world with Stela Murrizi. Well, once again, I'm really honored to be connected with today's guest on not just the Poetry of Predicament podcast, but also the Take My Hand parenting focused side project, if you will, of the podcast. The notion being that there are an extraordinary number of people who are facing with full awareness the collapse of Earth and human systems that's going on right now in our world. And they not only bring their own level of conscious awareness to this extraordinary time, but they have also chosen to have children, to be parents in this time. And Stela Murrizi is one of those people. And that's who's the guest in this particular interview. And Stela comes from the lineage that we've already started with in a number of earlier interviews, starting with Louise Lebrun and Deb Ozarko. And that was a wild one. If you haven't seen those two together in that earlier interview, I would heartily recommend checking that out. And you may also have seen an earlier interview, one of the first that we did in this parenting series, with Naomi Irons from Hawaii. And if you've seen those, that you get a sense that this is an extraordinary bunch of people. These are people who have done some serious inner work and are really stepping up to face the realities of our world, and uniquely equipped with an ability to be present in the face of large-scale stressors, and also uniquely equipped to be internally referent, to be deeply empowered by knowing what the difference is between the default living in the business as usual world that we all call normal, and shifting from that default to a far more empowered way of perceiving and presencing themselves in the world through largely through the methodologies put together by Louise Lebrun. And I think each of these people is also bringing an immense amount of their own personal experience and lineage, and I'm sure we'll hear about that from Stela. So welcome to another round of both the Poetry of Predicament podcast and the Take My Hand Collapse Aware Parenting series. And Stela, welcome to this interview. It is such a pleasure to meet you. We got to talk just a little bit before hitting the record button here. And once again, I'm just delighted by your willingness, your presence, the excitement that I feel to be able to touch into this methodology that you all share, and the special presence that keeps showing up consistently amongst you all. Just a real pleasure to have you here. And Stela, would you fill in any gaps that I've left? I've mentioned almost nothing about you. I'd be so pleased if you would let us know how you would like to be known, how you would like to be introduced. And so welcome here.
Dean, thank you so much. It's actually such a pleasure to be here talking to you about this. There aren't too many people that want to engage in this kind of conversation out there.
Yeah.
And I feel empowered talking about this publicly and openly from where I stand in this moment and from the choices that I get to make in this moment. I guess a little about me would be that I share who I am through conversations with people like Louise and definitely Debo Zarko and Sheila Winter Wallace, who you will also have on your podcast. And I'm thrilled to see that. And I stay in touch with people like Naomi. And these are the people that inspire me. These are the people that allow me to light my fire and live in that moment to moment to moment. Everything else, my job, background, I feel is not all that relevant to this conversation, although I'm sure it will come up. I don't know. I'm just going to be here in this moment and see where this conversation takes us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm curious, if you don't mind me just picking up a thread here and see if you're willing to go this direction for a moment. When we talk about, I throw around these words, the collapse of Earth and human systems, and you and I both mentioned those words before we got going on the recording. I'm wondering if you would say just a little bit about what you mean by those words. I certainly know what I mean by them, but I also notice that it's really mischievous to think, even using the words climate change, to think that if there are four people in a conversation, that there's going to be any sort of really shared common definition of what climate change means, much less collapse. So I'm wondering if you would just say a little bit about what it is that you mean when you say any of these terms, and sort of in the form of, like, what concerns you when you look out in the world and you see these larger scale issues. What are the ones that really show up in the forefront for you?
So climate collapse to me is evident in most of the systems unfolding in the world. I can hear the earth screaming. I can hear her responding to, honestly, the violence that I think we've perpetuated against her for tens, possibly hundreds of years. And she is now in response to that. And I'm not saying that the earth is necessarily conscious. I'm not saying she's unconscious. I don't know. But what I do know is that the way that my body had been screaming up until very recently, I know that the earth is doing the exact same thing. And I feel and I notice around me, there are no sustainable systems. We have created this world of unsustainable spaces and places. And so, of course, the earth is going to be reacting. And she's doing this absolutely through the climate in ways that I believe rather shortly, will not be able to sustain human life and other types of life on the planet. I mean, there are species going extinct every single day. And I don't know the number, but I know that there's a ton of species going extinct every single day. Never mind what we're actually slaughtering on a daily basis and what we're murdering on a daily basis and what we're enslaving on a daily basis. So all that energy, all that we've attached, all that we've put out, all that we've put forward, I believe is leading to the space where the earth no longer sees humans as quite welcome on this planet. And I don't blame her. So I think that was the first part of your question, and I forgot the second part.
That's actually just fine. That's exactly what I was hoping you would share, is what you see when you scan out in the world, and particularly what comes to the forefront. What are the things that really get your attention first when you do that scanning? And so that was really clear, and I appreciate that. Just to give you a little context about some of the folks who are in the audience for this kind of podcast, there's a pretty wide range. You know, obviously there aren't too many climate change deniers and that sort of thing that hang out in this space. But there is quite a range out from there of what people, like if they were asked that same question, they would answer it possibly quite differently than you just did. And I would say for myself, I'm probably pretty close to where you've positioned yourself. I would say similar things. What I'm particularly noticing as I'm having conversations with you, and particularly the other women that I'm able to interview from this lineage, from this methodology that you all share, there's a particular flexibility and sensitivity that I so far am experiencing in every one of you. First, you're entirely internally referent. You know, where you go to answer a question is you go into a well-mapped space that you are very familiar with inside yourself.
Most days.
Sorry?
Most days.
Yeah, sure. I know that. Yeah, I get it. And there's a particular state that if I look at the average person on the other end of the spectrum, people who are possibly just barely aware of there's something going on with climate change, and they're just kind of annoyed by the conversation and they don't really care much. And from there all the way through the denier crowd, there's a rigidity that shows up in the vast majority of folks on that end of the scale of really wanting to hold on to a sense of control, a sense of certainty. Like if I just hold on tight enough, and particularly if I don't pay attention to these annoying facts and the science and so on, and just the reality that one can get by just scanning the earth. If I don't pay attention to those, and if I just hold on tight to what I learned growing up, that we are going to have infinite growth on this finite planet, and every generation is going to be better off than the last, and everything's okay, and you know, we'll find the right technology to fix it all, and so on and so on. What I wanted to point out here was that in each of you that I've had the pleasure of being with now in these conversations, there's what my lineage would call a liquid state that is far more available to you. And so I should just say a little bit about that in case it didn't convey, like in my conversation with Naomi or others. So when you're that internally referent and you don't have a grip of control or trying to maintain certainty, and
Mhm.
you're then allowing yourself to just scan and what's real in this moment, there's a power in that. And there's a reason why I call it a liquid state, because that's how it shows up for me when I'm in
Mhm.
my version of that. So I'm going to stop here and just see, is this making sense as I'm laying it out? And do you have anything that you're sparked to say out of what I'm pointing to?
Yes, to both of those questions. So there are a few things that kind of came up for me as you were sharing that. I believe I understand this idea of a liquid state. It just seems like something that is a state that is more fluid, that is more adapting, that kind of sees the nooks and crannies and delves into those spaces rather than my boundaries are this and this. My mom taught me this and this. My dad taught me that. I'm not willing to look past that. A circle is a circle and a square is a square, and there is no other shapes available to me. Whereas for me, this liquid state feels like a space of all the geometry, all the spaces, all the states, and intertwined and mixed and fluid. Like that's what I get. I get fluidity. I see water. I see the state of water when I see this. And there were two other things that came up. What you were talking about, people who are not on the end of the spectrum, so people who want to deny climate change, whether or not they see it, whether they see evidence of it. They deny what they see, feel, hear. They deny their internal state because there is safety in ignorance is bliss, right? Like we pretend the violence that we cause every day in the world isn't real. It isn't me. I'm not the one doing climate change. I'm not the one being climate change. It's the evil corporations. Not linking the fact that I am climate change. I am the evil corporations. I am the purchasing power behind everything that's happening in this moment. My every single choice in every single moment determines the outcome of what's happening. It determines the moment. Whereas for me, that choice in the moment is exceptionally empowering. I've made a number of decisions where, not based out of fear, full on knowing that my choices impact the state of the world. And I wasn't here. I spent a lot of time feeling disempowered, blaming the politicians, blaming the corporations, and kind of an activist state. Being at that end, so I understand people who are there, because there's tremendous fear, like you said, associated with being there. So you don't know what to do, you don't know what else is available. So you blame the big bad wolf, you blame whoever it is that you can point your finger to at the moment, and that might change. And then there are the other people who see that the climate situation is dire. It's not in our favor, and they still hold out what I really like Sarko's. I mean, this is where I heard it first, is hopium. So they just they hold out hope. It's like things will get better at some point in life, and I don't really have to do anything about it. It just will magically get better, because they too live in fear. I just need to plug in my phone. Um, and when you live in fear, it's easier to be hopeful. And then there are people who are willing to look it in the eye. And yeah. Sorry, I
Stella,
thought you started saying something.
you just froze up a little bit around from about when you were uh, describing how Debo Zarco spoke about hopium and what conclusions you were drawing for yourself out of that. Could you say some of that again? I don't expect you to repeat it, but I'm just wondering if you can cover that ground a little bit, because you froze up during those few sentences.
Sure, I was plugging my phone in, so. um, just the people, then there are people who live in the state of, um, like I said, what Debo Zarco calls hopium, where they see what's going on. They're aware that there's climate shifts happening, but they hold out hope. They hold out that somebody out there at some point will do something that will save us. So whether that's technology, or whether that's, the end of the capitalist system, or whether that is whatever, fill in the blank. But they hold out this, I believe, in my worldview, false sense of hope that things will just magically shift and change and everybody will be safe. But I do not hold that belief. I do not hold that hope. And the moment that I liberated myself from that hopium, I became free to make much more aligned choices for myself.
Really clear. Thank you for that. I can only imagine that at the center of that, or pretty close to it, was your choice to have a child in these times. Can you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. This is such a huge part of my life. And I spent a tremendous amount of time trying to ignore the realities of the world, and just kind of believing that things will be okay. When I knew that that wasn't the case, and then when I accepted that that isn't the case, I spent a tremendous amount of time trying to intellectualize, analyze, figure out what the best course of action would be in terms of having a child. And at no point during this intellectual, and I struggled a lot through it. Like I spent countless of hours crying, and because it just did not make any sense
Mm-hmm.
to bring a child into this world. It felt like, what is the point? And then I found freedom in two different things. One is that this is my journey on this planet. As the self that I am, as the soul, the spirit, the energetic being, whatever people want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
I have to have this experience while I am on the planet. And I kept coming back to that. I kept coming back to, this is what my soul needs to manifest. This is one of the creations that I am here to put forth. And another was making peace with the fact that my child may not see old age. My child may not see double digits even. And that's okay. I decided that I am okay with whatever it is that ends up happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we create our own reality. So I found comfort in that, and I made tremendous peace with that.
Yeah.
And my partner and I decided that we're going to go ahead and do this. And there hasn't been a moment of regret, Dean. There hasn't been a moment of fear. There hasn't been a moment of questioning this decision. It's this is my reality. This is what I chose. This is the creation that I chose from, you know, some people call it their higher selves, from my higher self, from the source, from the infinite that I am. And it's the right decision. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Despite the overpopulation, despite
Yeah.
living in a Western world, despite the consumerism, despite it all.
Yeah. I'd like to stop you here just for a moment. I'm following you completely. I'm not surprised by anything that you're saying, but I'd like to just reel it back a little bit, because my experience of this work, this deep inner work that runs by a number of different names in different lineages,
Yep.
and the elements, I'd like to just articulate different elements as they might show up in our conversation. One of them was this liquid state idea, and my sense is we'll probably get back to that again before we're over here. But there's another distinction that you just went kind of quickly through, that while I followed you, I'd like to take a few moments to really land there and really honor that distinction. And the distinction, you know, not that I invented some special words or anything, but this is the realm of letting go. And
Mm,
there are a lot of different ways to perceive this idea of letting go. Perhaps again on a continuum of depth and possibly difficulty. You know, there's one thing about letting go of a dream that I wanted to be an astronaut. You know, that's one kind of letting go. Then there's the kind of letting go that gets closer and closer to the fabric that we weave, that creates who we are in the world. That combination of our presence and our capacity to move life through us. And
I love that. I just love that.
so I just heard you saying that you and your partner were really able to land at a very similar space of being able to let go at the level of being able to fully commit to what it is to create another human being and bring them into this world with all that implies. And also to be able to let go of the remarkably traditional and romanticized story of this is what it is to raise a child, and they're going to have this track in life, and they'll be able to look forward to this, and it'll always be better than the generation before, and on and on and on. There's so much of that traditional mythology that's so wrapped around much of human life. So I just wanted to articulate that I got a sense that you, in saying that you let go, that you were talking about this far deeper letting go, this letting go at the level of the fabric of reality, not just preferences or not just established long-standing stories that the culture tells itself. So I'm curious if my saying this has sparked you to say anything.
What you're saying is very, very deep for me. And I particularly enjoyed the part of letting go so that we get closer to the capacity to move more life through. That is absolutely brilliant. And there's definitely a continuum of letting go, as you said. And that continuum can include things like, is my child going to be a doctor? or a lawyer? Are they going to live, you know, in a giant house or a massive house? All of which are not at all considerations for me in any capacity. Um, there is very little from the culture around me that I choose to hang on to for my child, for the potential of this child and the life that they're potentially going to live. And for myself, I've had to let go of the notions even around how long people should live. Um, what is the point in bringing life in if they're only going to live 5 or 10 or 20 years?
Yeah.
I've had to let go of the idea that that even matters. I've had to let go of the fact that we're never guaranteed anything. We're not guaranteed life. So I've had to let go of a lot of things that are not material. Absolutely. A lot of things that I'm not sure how to put it. I letting go so that I allow the I am that I am to come through and allow that, including in the form of a child, of a biological child. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
Do you mind a different track of question for a second?
sure.
All right. So I'm curious. It seems like you have a certain amount of shared common ground with your partner in this process. That looks like it's a gift.
It's a
You know,
blessing, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, that's not something that is a guarantee at all in my experience.
Well,
So congratulations. Yay.
I manifest well.
There you go. Good job.
And so does he.
So would you actually, let's follow that thread right there, if you would. I'm curious how you share this unique language with each other that we're using with each other to some degree now. How do you share this kind of language with each other? And I'm curious if either or both of you have an experience of others in your circles of friends or in your family. Do you have pockets where you can have either pieces of this kind of conversation or better or even more than just pieces? Or do you find yourselves um, a bit lonely from time to time? Is that making sense as a question?
Yeah, absolutely. My partner and I have been together for 6 years, and we've known each other for 7. And we have both evolved tremendously with each other throughout this period of time. When I met him, if you don't mind me sharing a little bit
Please.
about this,
Yeah.
um, while I was still practicing yoga and living an increasingly more aligned life to what I now know is to be myself, than I would call my values, I, you know, was struggling to finish my master's degree because it didn't hold too much um, relevance for me at that time. And I was struggling with addiction to substances. And I was having a much harder time experiencing the signal that I am to come through. There was the shoulds that came in, there was the musts that came in, there was the hopium little bit, and the ignorance of I'd rather not know these things. So he has been an incredible support in my life, and I trust that I in his. And we evolved together. And I would talk about, being a, a god, having had those experiences during some of my meditations. And I'm not sure that he quite um, believes that. That's not the reality that's his at the moment. And he's willing to engage in those conversations for hours and hours on end and years on end. So for me, it's become more, more and more real, more and more an everyday thing. Like today, I woke up and the first conscious breath that I took, I felt this absolute overwhelming sense of I am God force living on this planet. I am the field. I have a body. I can touch it. I can feel it. And it isn't who and what I am. So I wrote a post about it. And I have these kinds of moments frequently, increasingly more and more and more. And then what I choose to do with my day just becomes so much easier. Um, the language that he and I share sometimes doesn't align, but it always ends up kind of at the same point. So he will say things like, well, what does it matter? If nobody's going to be around, then what does it matter? Which hits the point of, yeah, we live for the moment. We do this now. We make this choice from the space that we are in this moment. So he is an incredible gift in my life, because there are very few people that I can have this conversation with. And certainly if he were not willing to engage in this kind of conversation, then I'm not sure that I'd be able to be where I am in this moment. I wouldn't have chosen to be pregnant. I wouldn't have chosen to have a child, which then of course creates all kinds of other, problems in the family and all that. Anyway, there aren't many other people that I can talk to as openly as I can with him. Certainly not in the family. Some of my friends are quite confused about what are you talking about? They have no idea what this means. They have no idea what, in fact, some find it offensive that I would say, I am God. It's like, there is a God, you're not it. He is somewhere else.
Yeah.
He can move through you, but you're not it. Slow down. And of course, there are people like Sheila and Louise and the group of women that Sheila has put together, where this is a very normal conversation to be had. And of course, there's a continuum and a spectrum within there too, that some people are more hopeful, some people are what I would say more realistic, some people are more in touch, and some people hang on to the cultural conditioning a little bit tighter. Some people can accept that they are God forces on this planet and can have that experience because they allow themselves to, and some people can't. So it's a variety of different types of people, and I try to, in fact, I do connect with people that hold similar worldviews to me, and that fills me up with joy. That fills me up with excitement for life, and I just continue and just continue in my journey. And if people don't understand, like at work, it's rare that I'd have this kind of conversation at work, because it's very much business as usual. But in my ability to be who I am, I can own that even at work. And I'm not afraid to share who I am even at work. And some people walk away, like roll their eyes and walk away. And some people are like, okay, I'm a little bit interested. And we go from there.
Yeah. Thank
So,
you. Yeah. I a couple months ago, I got to do an interview with a man who I would say is a futurist and a designer of human systems, regenerative human systems, and his name's Joe Brewer, and just find him to be brilliant and a very different lineage, a very different track in life, but lots of inspiration there. And I was asking him, when he's designing uh, human systems for possible futures, something offering far more life-giving future than what we're in now. I asked him, what are the skills that people would need in order to live into that kind of a future that you're designing?
mhm.
And he mentioned two things, just kind of off the cuff. I'm sure there are more, but these two are the ones that he focused on. He mentioned they would need advanced self-regulation skills. So the ability to self-regulate, the ability to return ourselves to what we would consider our resilience zone, the zone that we know we're in good shape, we're able to interact with the world in a good way. There might even be a little bit of creativity and humor in there. You get the idea. And the other piece that he mentioned is that these people would need to have psychological flexibility.
Mm,
So I'm just for a moment going to bundle a few things that you and I've been talking about into the psychological flexibility part of the equation as he laid it out. I'm just taking lots of poetic license here because I haven't had this particular conversation with him, so I'm just kind of blending a bunch of stuff together. And I'm asserting that many of the things that you and I've been talking about, if it's the ability to let go at an extraordinarily deep level, the ability to approach and lean into a liquid state in order to pursue the truth of the moment in any given moment, rather than
mhm,
repel from it or be in fear of it. So those to me are an unusual way to describe the psychological flexibility. You know, really, I think those distinctions are far beyond where most psychotherapy goes, most counseling goes. It's far beyond just the idea of regular mental health. I think those are extraordinary level distinctions for people who are beyond the, needing counseling kind of level. So I'd like to just bump into that self-regulation point that he made. And first, I'm curious if there's anything you would like to say about the dynamic as it shows up to you in just being in the world, as you experience it, with the concerns that you see and so on. What are the kind of things that knock you out of that resilience zone?
mm.
And what are some of the ways that you find useful to return yourself consciously to that zone when you want to? Well, let's just start there and see. First, is this making sense as a question, and are you sparked to say anything about
Yes.
that?
What knocks me out of the resilience zone is forgetting what I am.
Mhm.
So there will be times where the conditioning takes over. It really does. And the shoulds come in and the to-do lists come in and all that stuff, the blah, 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 blah from history and from
Yeah.
all of that starts to come in. And my body becomes tenser, my mental space becomes more dense, my ability to want to connect to the higher self, the soul, the signal, the field, call it what you want.
Mhm.
It becomes diminished. It becomes cluttered. And that's when I find I struggle the most. That's when things become blurry and difficult. And I don't find I'm resilient. I want to cry and I want to give up and I want to just disconnect and unplug and peace out, call it a day.
Yeah.
So naturally, what returns me to that, what returns me to consciousness is choosing to connect. So I can do that by reaching out. I can do that by meditating and yoga. I can do that by expressing myself. Um, I enjoy writing, so that's one way to do it. And I can do that by connecting. I feel like that's a huge one. So whether I connect to other beings that understand what I'm going through and are willing to give me the space to be a mere mortal for a while before I remember what
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
It's nice to have those people around. They're friggin' awesome. And yeah, or if that doesn't work for me, then sometimes my body gets agitated, so I need to release um, physically in order to be able to connect spiritually. So for me, yoga is a really good way to do that. I live kind of in the country, so running barefoot is a good way for me to do that. Um, Going for a walk and just kind of remembering how massive I am and all these other things that are happening in the moment are trivial. And if I remember who I am and what I am, these things will sort themselves out because I create my reality. So I can just choose to take it easy. I can just choose to take a breath, take a few breaths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I appreciate that. And I'm I'm particularly curious, if you don't mind, I'd just love to share a little bit about an element in my work with people in this type of conversation that shows up a lot recently, especially in this past year. It's been showing up ridiculously often, and that is reconnection with people.
Mm,
You know, finding my people.
mm,
That's really the shorthand that I ended up with when I was writing my book a few years ago, and I put it out in 2017. And I kept asking the question time and time again as I was writing, what happened to get us here? How did we get into this giant global predicament that we're in? And the answer kept coming back that we're disconnected. We're
mhm,
disconnected from all the primary sources of meaning in a human life. And the shorthand that I used for that was We've disconnected from our deeper selves,
Yeah.
from each other, from the earth, and even from soul. And so, again, just how it's shown up recently in particular is the just the devastating lack of the ability to connect with people in a meaningful way. Particularly, I'm speaking about in the States, in this particular pocket of privilege that this country is, that is so encased in a membrane of resistance to reconnecting any of those, whether it's deeper self, others, earth, or soul. It just seems like in every direction, there's this resistance to allowing that liquid state that we keep talking about, and ultimately that chance to reconnect. And so I'm curious if you could say anything about how that shows up for you, that meaning the emphasis on finding our people in these times, that these are, appear to me as being times that for the average person, if you will, this is not a good time to try and gut it out alone, to try and muscle through and override and try and, survive this thing alone. And so what I'm seeing an awful lot is people who really are deeply hungry for the connection with other people, to find their people, and not knowing how to do it, having been separate for so long. So let me just stop there and see if that sparks you to share anything.
This is an incredibly deep and meaningful, not only conversation, but also like topic. It's huge, because without a tribe, how a lot of people don't know how to orient themselves.
Yeah.
The irony a little bit is that when you're disconnected from yourself, you cannot be connected with people who are connected to themselves, even though that's what you're seeking, or you think that's what you're seeking. So without taking a moment, without taking a breath for the self, is difficult to connect with others. What I found very interesting in my journey, so two examples come to mind. It's when I was struggling with addiction for a decade, I didn't really know where to turn. And like, I went to counselors and I went to different people who were supposed to help me, but only gave me strategies. Here's a strategy for you to try. And I would try that and I would fail miserably. And then the guilt and the shame and the blame all kind of makes its way in, and then it reinforces itself. And I didn't know where else I could go. When I made the decision that this is no longer who I am, and it was a visceral experience of, this is not who I am any longer. It wasn't I'm so tired of this, or the usual kind of stuff. It was, I'm freaking done. When I made that decision, and I decided to look into Narcotics Anonymous, which is no longer an institution I'm involved in for a variety of reasons, the notion of control being one of them. But anyways, it was right across the street from my school. So I've been going through this for the last 5 years, and I didn't know to look right in my backyard. And I believe that's because I wasn't ready. There was something in me that just wasn't ready and was hanging on to the notion of struggle and was hanging on to the notion of, I don't know what to do. And again, I met Sheila at a time, maybe a year or so later after this incident, where that wasn't working for me. There was something deeper and I could feel it, I could sense it, and I knew it. And I met her at the most unlikely of places, my workplace, and I worked for the federal government of Canada. So it was not a space that you would expect to meet someone like Sheila in. And
Right.
I just stopped by her little setup that she put up there. I had no idea what craniosacral therapy is. I had no idea what any of the stuff that she had posted out there were. But the moment I started talking to this woman, and I did not understand most of what she was saying, there was a deep, deep truth that resonated with me. And I felt like this is home. This is someone that I must stay connected with. So I did. But I guess what I'm saying too is that when there is resistance, when there is the space of resistance, we end up creating more of what we don't want, more of what we don't like, simply because there's no fluidity, there's no liquid state, there's no ability to be in that liquid state.
Yep.
And so you hang out with the people you've always hung out with, you go to the same places you've always gone to, you just repeat those same things that you know how to do, and then wonder why your life isn't any different. Well, I mean, uh, that's why.
Yeah.
And in part, that comes from being disconnected from the self, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm curious if, thank you for that. Really beautifully clear. And I'm curious on a more personal level, how you doing with your own tribe? And let me start by just disclosing where I'm at. I'm in Southern Oregon. I've been here for more than 20 years. I'm connected with a number of different brilliant, wonderful circles of friends, and I notice that the type of relationship you were just describing and that we're talking about now is all too rare, even amongst all these wonderful people. These are smart, heartful, caring people. Creative, and on and on. I just have nothing but great things to say about them. And I notice that it's just oddly rare still that I'm able to connect with most of them in the way you were just describing. And so that's how I would describe my current situation. I've got more of my tribe is scattered around the world that I get to connect with in conversations like these at best. I wish it wasn't that way. I adore being face to face with people. That's just the best. And it's unfortunately rare that I get to connect with these people who are truly tribe directly, because we're spread all over the world. So
And
again, that's
you've
where
created
I'm
this.
at, and I'm wondering where you are, and if you could describe how that lives for you.
I feel like you've created the space for yourself, right? Like in a globalized international world,
Yeah.
here you are having these magnificent conversations with people that you wouldn't otherwise have had, right? Like you created that space for yourself, and I kudos to you.
Yeah.
I think that's fabulous.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree that it is incredibly rare to find people to connect with on that level. I find sometimes this is a lonely, solitary path.
Hmm.
Most people are not willing to walk it. Some people are, one foot in and the other kind of out here. Maybe a little bit of safety there, a little bit of testing things out over here. Um, so while there's a lot of people that are even willing, I often find the conversations limited. I often find, because of course they can only offer what they're able to, and I'm sure it's the same with me.
Yeah.
Um, so I do find it sometimes lonely, sometimes isolating, and I'm very appreciative of what Sheila has created because there's a little bit of a community there.
Yeah.
I'm very appreciative that Louise Lebrun is my friend because I get to have these massive conversations with her.
Yeah.
And so I create that for myself too, right? It's little pockets, absolutely. And they're meaningful pockets because they sustain me. They sustain my being in these conversations and I'm able to evolve from that. And some of these experiences with Sheila, I mean, they're absolutely incredible. They stem from Louise's work, but it is she who is manifesting them. It is she who is providing the space and holding the space for people to come in and evolve
Yeah.
if they so choose. They call it evolution by intention,
Yeah.
right? So it's amazing when that does happen and when you do have these people to connect with. Um, and I accept that it's a rare occurrence, and I let go of the notion that it needs to be any more than that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we have what we need within ourselves, right? So it's if I'm able to stay connected to that piece of who I am and what I am, I live an incredible life.
Yeah.
So, and people like this become more attracted to being in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I'm 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 feeling, unfortunately, the envelope of our time together starting to come to a close, and I'm curious if you would just scan one more time in your experience, and I'm wondering if there's anything you might offer to other folks who are somehow their interest is piqued in this conversation. They're finding something compelling about these conversations that keep showing up, and they need a bit more of a bridge. They would I think that there's a substantial hunger. um Uh-oh, looks like your light went out.
One
There you go.
second.
Hey, there you are. um I'm curious if you have any words of possibly inspiration, possibly just sharing, uh, possibly offering suggestions for bridging between the business as usual human operating system that we all call normal, that very system that is really taking us down, and for the people who are hungry to bridge into some other possibility. Do you have any words to offer how they might start to create that kind of a bridge?
It's a really great question. Words of wisdom you're looking for, eh?
You know, I'd like to take the pressure off, really. I myself am most inspired when the answer to that kind of question comes from really the simple little things that make up a day, how we deploy our attention in this new way. How might I just shake loose my left foot from that business as usual paradigm? How might I just get a few extra breaths of pause in a day? So I would like to take the pressure off of you having to have the ideal answer. I'm just wondering if you have any of those smaller gestures or smaller motions that you have found precious.
The way that we take a breath is by taking a breath, right?
Yeah.
The only way to connect with ourselves and what's going on is to take the time for ourselves, and it doesn't have to be a rigid 45-minute silent meditation, chanting mantras, or, it can be any of those things, and there are so many effective tools out there.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that listening to my own body, my own deep intuition, and being able to distinguish between fear-based intuition and real soulful intuition makes such a huge, huge difference. Just the ability to trust that I know what I know, I see what I see, I hear what I hear, and I feel what I feel, right? The ability to trust that when my body says turn left, I turn left. And I find that there's a lot that blocks us from doing that. There's a lot out there that tells us, no, you shouldn't do that, or you're not good enough to do that, or, you know, family has taught you this and that. And so we buy into that. We quickly shut down whatever it is that's going on in our bodies, and we turn to, oh no, I mustn't. Or if I feel this way, there's something wrong with me. And that's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And the more that we listen to that, breathe into the space that feels real, the space that feels authentic, the space that feels raw, the more that we can access what the internal state of being, the more that we can be internally referenced, the more that we can look at that space within and make decisions from that point. I don't know. To me, that's the best thing. If I'm feeling agitated in my body, I'll go for a run or move. Find a way to move. Um, if there's anxiety, don't turn to the PAMs to shut that down, right? Like, let it move, let it flow, let the wave move, let it do what it needs to do. And once you stabilize, you find yourself a different person. You find yourself more connected and more able to make decisions for yourself that are valuable and meaningful.
Yeah.
At least that's where I'm at this point in time.
Yeah. Stella, it's just been a joy to connect with you, to meet you, to have this conversation. It's really only in the liquid state that I can meet you about your pregnancy and find the honoring and find the artfulness, the intent that you're clearly bringing to your choices here. And I've learned so much just in hearing how you lay out what what you've gone through to get to this place, and how it looks out ahead from this place for you. And I hope that we can get back together after you give birth, and perhaps there'll be a new chapter to have a conversation about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And life will be so different at that point again, right? I will be so different, and you will be so different, and the audience listening to this will be so different. And yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and it's been interesting how it's gone. I had an idea, sort of the direction that it would go in, and then it's been interesting the different topics that we just kind of chose to flow into. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, really enjoyed that way. You way back in the middle of the conversation somewhere, you mentioned something about having generated a posting, and I'm wondering if people wanted to somehow contact you or to read what you might be posting. Are you available on the web somewhere?
I am. I have a free blog post that I think I'm going to purchase a domain for. But right now I just use WordPress because
Yeah.
this is more so for me to express. It's an avenue of expression for myself. And when people read it and they connect with me, yes, I enjoy that. Absolutely. And it is for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So the name that I have chosen for myself is Stela Shakti.
Mm-hmm.
And if people Google that, they'll definitely find it, or Stela Murrizi, they should be able to get to it through that.
Great. I'll be sure to put those particular addresses in the show notes for this interview. So I'll be sure for you.
Yeah, sounds good. And maybe for my picture, you can use the picture that I have on. Actually, I wrote 2 blog posts today. I posted them today, but I wrote about intuitive pregnancy.
Yes.
And have a lot more to say about consciously choosing to have a child and my experience going through that. But the first 6 months of my pregnancy were quite focused on myself and taking that time. So these are posts that will be coming up in the future whenever there's a calling for me to talk about these things.
All right. Well, I'll be sure to sign myself up for that, and again put the notes in the show notes for this interview. Stela Shakti, Stela Murrizi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and I so look forward to the next chapter of our conversation sometime later on.
Thank you, Dean. This has been really fun.
All right. Take good care.
You too.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.